Hello, Bravos. We're back with Shakespeare's Sweetheart by Sarah Hawk Sterling. Chapter 9. A Young Maid's Wits. Slowly and painfully I walked back to Shottery that evening, holding my fretful babe to my bosom. I met no one as I went, but at the door of the cottage my grandam stood, anxiously awaiting me. I remember her shocked exclamation when she saw my face in the light, and I recollect how I put Susanna into her arms with a smile which must have been ghastly indeed, and said, "She is thine now, grandam, poor little orphan. Her father and mother are dead." And at that the color fled from my face, and I dropped prone across the threshold. With that swoon, a long blank in my memory begins. This part of my story must be written entirely from what my grandam and others have told me since. I recollect nothing from the time I dropped unconscious on the floor of our cottage until a later day, months afterwards, of which I shall speak in due course. My grandam, in alarm and perplexity, strove at once to revive me, but the attempt was vain for some time. The babe was wailing piteously from fright and hunger, and my grandam at length turned her attention to Susanna, soothed her with difficulty, and at last laid her to rest. When my grandam returned, she was surprised to find me risen to a sitting position. "So thou art better, Nan?" she said in a relieved way as she hastened towards me. I turned and looked at her with blank, unseeing eyes. "Better," I repeated in a toneless voice. "Nay, I shall never be better. My heart is broken, grandam, broken, I tell thee." I leaned towards her coaxingly and caught her hands in mine. "Send word to Will, and he'll come," I whispered. "He will come and cure me." Then a sudden convulsion crossed my face, and I flung her hands away. "Nay, nay," I cried wildly, "I had forgot. He will never come again. No, 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 never again." And with tears in mine eyes, I crooned a snatch of an old country song. "Will he not come again? Will he not come again? No, no, he is dead, gone to his deathbed. He will never come again." My grandam stood an instant in stony silence, while I rocked and muttered before the fire. Past and present seemed to meet as she gazed at me. Often had she seen my mother thus, gloomy and distraught. Was the long nightmare of her life to be repeated in her child? "Nay, Nan," she said at length, coaxingly. "Nay, Nan, thou art mistaken. He will come again surely, lass, and bring joy to thee and me. To bed now. Little Sue is already sleeping." She attempted to lift me, but I withstood her, pettishly. Let be, I muttered, gazing into the fire and pointing to the red embers. "I am watching the autumn leaves. Once they were green and tender and young. It was May then. What comes in May? Ah, yes, I remember. It is love." It was a lover and his lass. Sing hey and ho, na na no. And through the green fields they did pass in the springtime. But 'tis autumn, crimson are they, those leaves, like the blood of my heart. My heart is broken, and I am dead. Why am I not buried, grandam? "Thou dearest Nan," said my grandam, but her voice was hopeless. "Ah, I know," I murmured, wisely nodding at the fire. "'Tis because there are no violets. I must have violets upon my grave. Canst not get me some, grandam? Then I could rest, and I am tired, oh, so tired." I moved my head restlessly from side to side, and moaned. "Child, they are all withered," my grandam answered, attempting to humor my fancy. "I know," I answered instantly. "'Twas when Will died that they withered, was not? Methinks he died in autumn. I cannot remember. They bore him barefaced on his bier, and on his grave rained many a tear. Nay, I cannot remember. I must be patient. It is my lady, oh, it is my love." So spake he, but I bade him swear not by the moon, because it changes oft. He must have done so after all, and yet bonny sweet Robin is all my joy. "Nay, that is wrong. Robin is not the name. 'Tis, ah, yes, I know. 'Tis Will." With that I sprang up suddenly with a joyous laugh and went to the door. My grandam interposed before I could open it. Where art going, lass?" she said soothingly. "'Tis late, dear maid." Will comes late, I answered with a happy smile. The world does not know yet, but he is mine. The moon has risen. He will be here soon. Let me go, grandam. I must to the gate to meet him. Let me go, I say. I narrowed my eyes and looked at her in threatening wise. She deemed it best to give me my way, and stood aside. I flung wide the door and looked out. The beauteous afternoon had ended in a dreary night. Rain was beginning to fall. The sky was pitchy dark. The path to the gate was strewn thick with autumn leaves. A dreary wind was howling. For an instant I stood gazing at the dismal scene with mute but increasing distress. Then I turned and fell sobbing into my grandam's arms, weeping. I allowed her to lead me to bed tearfully. I let her do with me as she would, and I was tractable for the remainder of that night. She had some hope that when morning came I would be restored to my usual state, but it was not so to be. My first waking, troubled words referred again to Will's death, to faded violets, and to some crimson horror which apparently preyed upon my mind. My poor grandam was in dire perplexity and distress as regarded my wanderings. She had no clue to the mystery. In the morning she brought the babe Susanna to me, trusting that I would be aroused at sight of her. Instead, I looked at the child with lackluster eyes, although the dear poppet crowed and stretched out her dimpled hands to me. Then suddenly I began to weep again, and to murmur sorrowful words about her orphaned state. That was the beginning of a weary winter, the most sorrowful one of my grandam's sad life. She knew of absolutely no reason for my condition. I had mentioned Mistress Quickly's name in my wanderings, and my grandam went to consult her, but was not aided thereby. The cheery innkeeper did not connect me with the fine visitors she had had, and I learned long afterwards the Countess and Lord William had made their inquiries with seeming carelessness and had not dwelt long upon the subject. Neither Mistress Quickly nor my grandam suspected that their presence in Stratford was responsible for my condition. My grandam could neither read nor write, so she had no way of letting Will know about my state. Letters came from him occasionally, but they were as a sealed book to her. Afterwards, I read these and found that they gradually grew more wondering and insistent as to the cause of my silence. He wrote that he could not well leave London during the winter, but when spring came he would seek Stratford speedily. Meanwhile, why did I not write? Once or twice my grandam thought of asking someone to write to Will, but she was a proud woman, and she felt, from what I said in my wanderings, that something must be wrong between us, that he was, in some mysterious way, partly responsible for my condition, and all her old mistrust of him revived. The poor babe felt the change in her mother, and from a healthy, happy child turned into a quiet, pensive infant. My grandam oft hath said since that it was sad to see how little Sue would sit and gaze at me in mournful silence, as if half comprehending that something was wrong. As for me, I took no notice whatever of the babe. It was as if she did not exist. Nope, skip the page, right? Wearily, sadly, the months dragged away until at last the springtime came. With the violets for which I had longed, my healing seemed to begin. I grew less gloomy. I loved to be out of doors, and to deck myself with flowers. I began to notice the child and to play with her a little. My grandam saw these happy changes, and almost unbidden, hope sprang up again in her heart. The final restoration of my wits came at length, without warning. One balmy day in early April I came in from the fields, crowned and garlanded with flowers. I sang snatches of old songs and murmured about the same old themes. The next morning I awoke myself again, the past months a blank. The afternoon beneath the willows alone a distinct remembrance. Never did I see my grandam so moved as when she found that day that I was once more myself. She gazed at me a moment, I remember, with incredulous joy, Then, as I made some sensible remarks about the babe at play nearby, she suddenly burst into tears. Anne, she cried, coming close to me and looking yearningly into my face, is it truly thou thyself once more? And then she checked her words as I gazed at her in amazement. Why not, dear grandam? I said wonderingly, looking at her with inquiring glance. Ah, and my face clouded. Thou meanest that conversation that so troubled me? Sooth, it brought me much sadness, but I have thought it over, and me seems that perhaps, well, we will talk later about that. Where's the babe? Come hither, sweet, and kiss thy mother. A short time after, I told her, apparently with little emotion, of the words I had overheard by the willows that autumn day. To my listener, it made many more things clear than I quite understood then. I remember still the anxious feeling I had while narrating the incident. It was as if what I told was about some other person for whom I felt sorry. When I had finished, I added in a businesslike way, it would not be fair to Will, I have concluded, to take their word without having seen with my own eyes whether they spoke truth. I will to London and find out for myself. My grandam stared at me aghast. I spoke as airily as if going to London were as easy an affair as walking into Stratford. She did not venture to cross me, however, but, hoping to divert my attention from the idea I had just expressed, she brought out Will's letters and gave them to me without comment. Her wish was that my desire to go to him would vanish when I had learned the contents of the letters, but she was disappointed. I opened the epistles and read them calmly. They did not arouse any wonder in my mind. Why, I have never been able to understand. I was not impressed by the number of the letters, nor by the change in tone of their contents. The first few were simply narratives of events, but as time had gone on and he had still not heard from me, the spirit of the epistles had grown first wondering, then reproachful. The last one vowed that if I did not write within a month, he would run down to Stratford to find the cause of my long silence. He added that he had been sore distressed throughout the winter, owing to the lack of news from Shottery, but his business had held him close in London. I pondered over this last letter with something like a sneer. If indeed the words of the Countess were true, his duties had soothly held him close in London, and if so, I went to the window and looked out. Beyond, I saw the fair familiar scene in its spring freshness and beauty. When I had gazed thence last, consciously it had lain in autumn desolation. It is spring, I said, turning at last to my grandam with a sudden smile. Spring, and the roads are open. Within a fortnight I ride to London, grandam. But last, she answered cautiously, scarce knowing what to say, I fear me that thou canst not. The way to London is long and hard. For a man, even 'tis difficult. For a woman, impossible. I broke into light laughter, ran over to her, and threw both my arms around her neck. She stared at me uneasily. Such demonstration was new on my part. I cried gaily. Thou art right. Impossible for a woman, thou sayest sooth. But for a man, grandam, even a young one, a mere boy. I paused and smiled at her in mocking, suggestive fashion. Sorry, I just sounded like Ezra Pound there for a second. Nan, what meanst thou? Said my grandam, startled into sternness. She feared that my wits had once more gone wandering, and I am not sure how, but that they were. What meanst thou, lass? I laughed again and leaned my cheek against hers. A doublet and a hose. A doublet and hose, a cloak, I whispered. These would transform any woman. Moreover, dyed hair and skin stained dark. Dost think even a lover would know his mistress thus, much less a husband? Faithless, perchance. My face grew dark for an instant, then lighted with laughter again. For a woman 'tis nigh impossible to travel to London, but for a boy, even one so slight as I, what thinkest thou, grandam? I released her and laughed again. Then I stuck my hand upon my lip in jaunty, boyish fashion, and strode up and down the room, humming an air in braggadocio wise. My grandam sat gazing at me helplessly. She knew my meaning now. Madder than ever was I. She had no doubt, and yet How dared she cross me? All right, Probs. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Goodbye.